The Wyoming sun hung like a copper coin in the bleached sky, casting harsh shadows across the temporary holding pens where wild horses milled in anxious circles. Dust rose in golden plumes with each nervous stomp, coating everything. The splintered fence posts, the rusted water troughs, the weathered faces of the men who'd come to claim these creatures of the wind. Silas Wayne worked alone at the far end of the corral, his gnarled hands threading barbed wire through a gap in the fence. At 72, his body was a collection of old injuries and newer aches, held together by bourbon and stubbornness. The sun had carved deep lines into his face, each one a river of regret. His flannel shirt, once blue, had faded to the color of a winter sky, and his jeans bore patches on patches. The tool belt around his waist sagged with the weight of hammers and pliers, dragging at his hips like the burden of memory. He didn't look up when the black Escalade pulled into the dirt lot, though he registered the incongruous purr of its engine, so different from the diesel growl of ranch trucks. City money, he thought. The worst kind. Sterling Vance emerged from the vehicle like a man stepping onto a stage. His boots, ostrich skin, probably cost more than Silas made in 6 months, had never seen a real day's work. The BOLO tie at his throat sported a turquoise stone the size of a silver dollar, and his cream-colored Stetson sat at a calculated angle that screamed costume rather than culture. He was followed by 3 men in suits who looked deeply uncomfortable in the heat, and a woman with a tablet who typed everything he said. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vance announced to his small entourage, his voice carrying the practiced boom of a carnival barker. "What you're about to witness is the raw, untamed spirit of the American West. This is what we'll be bringing to the Arrowhead Peak Resort. Authenticity that money usually can't buy." Silas's jaw tightened, but he kept working. He'd seen men like Vance before. Developers who came to Wyoming with dreams of turning wilderness into profit, who saw the land and its creatures as nothing more than props in their fantasies. The group moved toward the largest pen, where the Bureau of Land Management's wranglers had separated the most problematic horses, the ones too wild, too aggressive, or too old to be easily adopted. There, pressed against the far corner, stood a stallion that made even the hardened cowboys nervous. The horse was pure black, not the soft black of a show horse but the deep, lightless black of a mine shaft. His coat was thick with dust and burrs, his mane a wild tangle that hung past his muscular neck. He stood nearly 16 hands, his chest broad and powerful, his legs showing the scars of a life lived in the mountains. White marks from barbed wire, a healed gash along one shoulder, hooves cracked from volcanic rock. But it was his eyes that arrested attention, dark, intelligent, burning with a fury that seemed almost human in its intensity. "That one," Vance said, pointing. "That's the centerpiece I want. Storm, they call him. Been terrorizing the northern ranges for years, smashing fences, stealing domestic mares, leading whole herds into BLM land where we can't touch them. 5 different attempts to catch him before they finally managed it last week." "Sir," one of the BLM officials said carefully, "I should warn you that horse is scheduled for the killers. He's too dangerous. Attacked 2 handlers already, sent 1 to the hospital. We can't in good conscience." "Everything has a price, friend," Vance interrupted, pulling out a checkbook. "What'll it take to make him mine instead?" Silas found himself drifting closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. Through the fence rails, he watched the stallion. The horse stood absolutely still despite the noise and movement around him. But his stillness wasn't submission. It was the stillness of a coiled spring, of thunder gathering in distant mountains. "We'll need to demonstrate his temperament for your investors," Vance said. "Show them what they're buying into." He gestured to one of his men, who returned to the Escalade and came back with a cattle prod, electric, humming with voltage. "Jesus Christ," someone muttered. Silas's hands stopped moving on the fence wire. The handler approached the pen cautiously, prod extended. The other horses scattered to the far end, but Storm didn't move. His eyes followed the man with an eerie focus. When the prod touched his flank, the voltage crackled. Storm exploded, not in panic but in calculated rage. He whirled, teeth bared, and the handler scrambled backward so fast he fell. The investors gasped and applauded nervously. "Magnificent," Vance crowed. "That's exactly the spirit I'm talking about. Raw power. Untamed wilderness. This is what will set Arrowhead apart from every other luxury resort in the Rockies. The handler went in again, jabbing the prod harder. Storm reared, his hooves flashing silver in the sun, a scream tearing from his throat that was pure defiance. But when he came down, when his front hooves hit the earth and sent tremors through the hard-packed dirt, Silas saw something that stopped his heart. The horse didn't run to the far corner like the others. He stood his ground, chest heaving, head high, and in his eyes wasn't just rage, it was dignity. It was the look of a creature that would rather die than be broken. But more than that, it was specific, particular. It was an expression Silas had seen only once before, 25 years ago, in eyes that haunted him still. The cattle prod came a third time. Storm took the shock without flinching, though his muscles rippled with the pain of it. He stood there, bleeding from where he'd scraped his shoulder against the fence, dust coating his heaving sides, and he looked directly at the men tormenting him with something that transcended animal fury. It was contempt. Silas dropped his tools. The clatter made several people turn, but he didn't notice. He was staring at the stallion, his chest tight, his hands beginning to shake. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But the way the horse held his head, slightly cocked to the left, the precise angle of his ears when assessing threat, the habit of striking the ground 3 times with his right hoof when angered. These weren't common traits. These were Bella's traits. Bella's bloodline. That's enough demonstration, the BLM official was saying. Mr. Vance, if you want to purchase this animal, we need to complete the paperwork before. Before you kill him, you mean? Silas's voice came out rougher than he'd intended, and used to speaking up, corroded by years of silence and whiskey. Everyone turned. Vance looked at him with the bemused expression of a man noticing a piece of furniture has moved. Excuse me. That horse, Silas said, stepping forward. His boots were held together with duct tape, his face unshaven, his hands grimy from fence work. He knew how he looked, like a man the world had used up and discarded. You can't just— Where did he come from? Which herd? I don't see how that's your concern, old-timer, Vance said dismissively, turning back to his investors. Now, as I was saying, the northern ranges, the BLM official said quietly, looking at Silas with a mix of pity and recognition. Up near the Gros Ventre. What? Silas's mind reeled. The Gros Ventre wilderness, the same mountains where, 25 years ago, he'd lost everything that mattered. Where Bella had vanished into a blizzard because he'd been too drunk to secure the stable doors. Where his life had ended, though his body had stubbornly continued breathing. Silas Wayne. A voice called from behind him. Been a long time since I heard you ask questions about horses. Silas turned to see Dr. Alden approaching, his veterinary bag in hand. Doc Bones Alden had earned his nickname from 4 decades of setting broken legs, animal and human both, in this unforgiving country. He was older than Silas by a few years, his face a road map of the territory they both called home, his white hair escaping from beneath a battered felt hat. Doc, Silas managed. That horse. I know, Alden said quietly, his eyes moving to Storm with an expression Silas couldn't read. I know exactly what you're seeing, and we need to talk. But not here. He raised his voice. Mr. Vance, before you complete any purchase, I need to examine that animal. County regulations. Can't sell livestock without a health certificate. Vance made an impatient gesture. Fine. Make it quick. We have dinner reservations in Jackson Hole at 7. As Alden moved toward the pen with his medical bag, he passed close to Silas and whispered, Martha's place. 1 hour. Don't be late, and for God's sake, be sober. Then he was gone, approaching Storm with the careful movements of a man who understood that some animals were meant to be approached as equals, not possessions. Silas stood rooted to the spot, watching as the old veterinarian spoke softly to the wild stallion, watching as Storm's ears flicked forward with interest rather than aggression. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the heat suddenly oppressive, the sounds of the corral fading to a distant hum. Bella. The name echoed in his mind like a prayer and a curse. He needed a drink. But more than that, and for the first time in 25 years, he needed to know the truth. Martha's Roadhouse sat 3 miles outside Broken Arrow on Highway 191, a weathered structure of logs and determination that had outlasted 3 economic downturns and countless winters. The neon sign in the window, beer, burgers, truth, flickered with the persistence of hope in hard country. Inside, the air smelled of grease, coffee, and the accumulated stories of men and women who'd chosen this life despite its cost. Silas sat in the back booth, the same booth he'd occupied for 25 years, wearing a groove in the vinyl with his sorrow. Before him sat a cup of black coffee, untouched. His hands trembled slightly, wanting whiskey, but Doc Alden's words echoed, "Be sober." Martha emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron that had seen better decades. She was 68, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been beautiful once, in the way of women shaped by this land, strong-boned and steady. Now she carried her years with a kind of defiant grace, refusing to pretend she was anything other than what she was, a survivor. "Coffee's getting cold," she observed, sliding into the booth across from him without invitation. "Which means either you're dying or something important's happening. Given that you've been slowly killing yourself for 2.5 decades, I'm hoping it's the latter." "Martha." "Don't Martha me, Silas Wayne. I've watched you pickle yourself in this booth for longer than some folks have been alive. So when Doc Alden calls and tells me to make sure you're here and sober, I pay attention." She leaned forward. "What's going on?" The door opened, bringing with it a gust of evening air and Doc Alden, who moved with the careful economy of a man whose joints protested every step, but whose mind remained sharp as winter wind. He carried a manila folder under his arm and the weight of secrets in his eyes. "Martha," he nodded. "Coffee, if you don't mind. Going to be a long conversation." She rose, squeezed Silas's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity, and headed for the coffee pot. The roadhouse was empty except for a truck driver at the counter, too absorbed in his phone to care about the drama unfolding in the back booth. Alden sat down with a sigh that spoke of more than physical weariness. He placed the folder on the table between them, but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he studied Silas with the clinical assessment of a doctor examining a patient. "How's your heart?" he asked. "Been broken for 25 years. Document." "You know that. I mean the physical one. The muscle that pumps blood. Because what I'm about to tell you might put a strain on it." Silas felt something cold crawl up his spine. "Just say it." Martha returned with coffee, set it down, and instead of leaving, she pulled up a chair. "I was there that night, too," she said quietly. "The night of the blizzard. I deserve to hear this." Alden wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, gathering warmth or courage. Silas couldn't tell which. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of blood and gold. December 14th, 1999, Alden began. 25 years ago next week. The worst blizzard to hit the Gros Ventre in 40 years. Temperature dropped to 30 below, wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour. Visibility 0. He paused. "You were drunk, Silas." "Not falling down drunk, but drunk enough that when you put the horses up that night, you didn't check all the latches properly." Silas flinched. He knew this part of the story, had lived it every day since. "Bella got out," Alden continued. "Your prize mare. The foundation of everything you'd built. 4-time champion cutting horse, bloodlines going back to King Ranch stock. But more than that, she was family to you. After your wife left, after the bankruptcy, Bella was what kept you going." "I remember, document." Silas's voice was barely a whisper. "Do you? Because here's what you don't remember, what you couldn't have known." Alden opened the folder, pulled out a faded photograph. It showed a mare, sleek, powerful, with the same proud bearing that Silas had seen in Storm's defiant stance. Bella was pregnant. The words hit Silas like a physical blow. "What? 3 months along. I'd confirmed it the week before, but hadn't told you yet. Wanted to wait until Christmas. You'd been so broken by everything that had happened, I thought the news of a legacy, might bring you back to life." Alden's voice cracked. Instead, the storm came. Martha reached across and took Silas's hand, her grip fierce and grounding. "You organized the search party the next morning," Alden went on. 20 men on horseback and snowmobiles, covering 50 square miles. "I went with them. We found tracks leading into the high country, but the snow had covered most of them. After 3 days, everyone wanted to give up. You kept going for a week, until hypothermia nearly killed you. We had to drag you back. I know all this." Silas's voice rose, raw with pain. "I know I killed her. I know I'm responsible." "Why are you?" "Because you didn't kill her." Alden's words fell like stones into still water. I did. Silence. Even the truck driver at the counter seemed to sense something and stopped eating. I found her, Alden said, his eyes distant, seeing something 25 years gone. 8 days after the storm. I'd kept searching after everyone else quit, partly because I was your friend, partly because I couldn't stand the thought of that magnificent animal dying alone in the snow. I went up near Sheep Creek, following a hunch, and there she was. He pulled out another photograph, this one harder to look at. Bella lying in the snow, her dark coat frosted white, her eyes closed. She was still alive, Alden whispered. Barely. She'd found a shallow cave, out of the wind, and she'd tried to survive. But 8 days without food, in that cold, pregnant, her body was shutting down. When I approached, she tried to stand. Couldn't. Just looked at me with those eyes, and I knew. She knew. It was over. Tears ran unchecked down the old veterinarian's weathered face. But the foal, he said, voice strengthening. The foal was moving. I could see it through her skin, fighting to live. And I made a choice, Silas. A choice I've questioned every day since. From the folder, he pulled a third photograph. This one showed a tiny colt, wet and trembling, lying in the snow beside its dead mother. I performed a field cesarean. It was brutal, primitive. I had my medical kit, but no proper facilities, no way to save Bella even if I'd tried. She died during the procedure, maybe from the cold, maybe from the surgery, maybe from relief. I don't know, but I got the foal out alive. Silas couldn't breathe. The world had narrowed to that photograph, that impossible image. A colt, Alden said. Small, premature, but fighting like hell. I wrapped him in my coat, got him back to my truck, spent the next 3 weeks keeping him alive with bottle feeding and prayer. And the whole time, I was faced with a decision. What decision? Silas managed. Whether to tell you. Alden said simply. You were in bad shape, Silas. Worse than bad. The guilt over Bella was eating you alive. You'd started drinking seriously, lost the ranch, lost everything. I watched you spiral, and I thought, if I bring you this fragile, premature foal that might not survive, it'll destroy you. If he dies, it'll be Bella all over again. You'll see it as one more thing you've killed. Martha made a small sound, halfway between a sob and understanding. So I made a choice, Alden said. The wrong choice, maybe. I don't know. I kept the colt alive until he was strong enough, until spring came. And then I took him up to the wilderness where Bella died, and I turned him loose. You what? Silas's voice was hollow. There was a wild herd up there, led by an old Mustang stallion. I'd been tracking them for years. I watched until I saw the Mares accept him, watched until I was sure he'd survive. And then I came back down the mountain and let you grieve for Bella, let you drink yourself into oblivion, and I carried the secret like a stone. From the folder, Alden pulled out a small, tarnished metal tag. He slid it across the table. Silas picked it up with shaking hands. Engraved on it was his ranch brand, the same brand he'd registered 30 years ago, a simple W crossed by an arrow. The same brand that had been on every horse he'd owned, including Bella. I put that on the colt before I released him, Alden said. Thought maybe someday, somehow, if he was ever caught, if he ever came back down from the mountains, there'd be proof. There'd be something to trace him back to where he came from. Storm, Silas breathed. Storm, Alden confirmed. 25 years old. The right age. Caught last week in the northern Grove Ventra, the exact territory where that wild herd roamed. I examined him today, Silas. Took hair samples, did a visual assessment. He has Bella's conformation, the same deep chest, the same powerful hindquarters, the same way of cocking his head when he's thinking. And more than that, Alden pulled out the final document from his folder, a DNA analysis report. I've been taking hair samples from captured Mustangs for years, building a genetic database. It's a hobby, trying to track bloodlines, see how the wild herds evolve. 3 years ago, I caught a mare from that same herd. Tested her. She showed markers consistent with Bella's lineage. I still had samples from when I treated her years ago. I didn't think much of it at the time, figured it was coincidence, distant relation. He tapped the report. This is Storm's analysis. I ran it this afternoon, paid for expedited results. He's not just related to Bella, Silas. The genetic markers indicate a direct line. Mother to son to grandson. Storm is Bella's grandson. Your legacy didn't die in that blizzard. It survived. It thrived. It became the wildest, most untamable horse in the territory. The roadhouse fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of trucks on the highway. Silas stared at the documents, the photographs, the small metal tag, and felt 25 years of grief crack open like ice breaking in spring. Why now? He finally asked, his voice raw. Why tell me now? Because Sterling Vance is going to torture that horse trying to break him, Alden said bluntly. Because that animal, your blood, your legacy, is going to end up either dead from abuse or broken in spirit, turned into some rich man's lawn ornament. And because I've carried this guilt long enough. Maybe I was wrong to keep the colt from you all those years ago. Maybe I robbed you of something that could have saved you. But I can't let it happen again. I can't watch your legacy die a second time without at least giving you the chance to save it. Silas looked up, and for the first time in 25 years, his eyes were clear. Behind the tears, behind the grief, was something harder, purpose. What do I do? He asked. Martha spoke for the first time since the story began. You stop being dead, she said firmly. You stop drowning in what you lost, and start fighting for what you still have. That horse out there carries Bella's blood. He's wild because he was born free, raised free. But he's also yours. In every way that matters, he's yours. Vance has money. Money isn't everything. Alden interrupted. That horse is documented property. He's wearing your brand. Or was, before it scarred over and faded. He's genetically proven to be descended from registered stock. Sterling Vance is trying to purchase what he thinks is a BLM Wild Mustang. But if we can prove Storm is actually privately owned livestock that escaped and went feral, the whole sale is invalid. Can we prove it? Silas asked. In time. The DNA analysis is solid, Alden said. But DNA alone won't be enough. We need to prove that tag belonged to Bella's colt, that I tagged him before release. We need my records, my testimony. He paused. And we need Storm to recognize you. We need him to show some connection, some proof that he's not just a random wild horse, but an animal with documented ownership history. He won't, Silas said bitterly. He spent 25 years in the wild. He doesn't know me from any other human trying to cage him. Maybe, Martha said. Or maybe blood calls to blood. Maybe some things run deeper than training or time. Outside, full dark had fallen. The mountains were invisible now, but Silas could feel them there. Ancient and patient, holding their secrets. He looked at the documents spread across the table, the DNA report, the photographs, the small metal tag that had survived a quarter-century of mountain winters. Evidence of a miracle he'd been too broken to receive. Evidence of a second chance that had been running wild while he'd been slowly dying in this booth. Tell me what I need to do, Silas said, and his voice was steady for the first time in 25 years. The law offices of Harriet Shun occupied the second floor of the old Masonic building in downtown Broken Arrow, above the hardware store and next to the dentist who'd been pulling teeth in this town since before most folks could remember. Shun herself was an anomaly in this corner of Wyoming, a Harvard Law graduate who'd returned to her grandmother's hometown 15 years ago with big city skills and small-town sensibilities. She'd built a practice on mineral rights, water disputes, and the occasional criminal defense, but she'd never handled a case quite like this. Let me make sure I understand, she said, looking over the documents Alden had spread across her desk. You want to claim ownership of a wild Mustang currently in BLM custody, scheduled to be sold tomorrow to Sterling Vance, based on a 25-year-old illegal release and genetic testing? That's about the size of it, Alden confirmed. It was 8 in the morning, 3 days after the conversation at Martha's Roadhouse. Silas sat in the chair beside Alden, freshly shaved for the first time in months, wearing clean clothes that Martha had quietly provided. He looked older without the camouflage of neglect, but also more present, more real. Chun, mid-40s, her black hair shot through with strategic gray, wearing a suit that managed to be both professional and practical, leaned back in her chair and studied them both. Dr. Alden, you're admitting to releasing privately owned livestock into federal wilderness without authorization. That's a violation of at least 3 different statutes. Mr. Wayne, you're claiming ownership of an animal you haven't seen in 25 years, based on bloodline evidence that, while scientifically sound, has never been tested in livestock ownership law in this jurisdiction. Yes, Silas said simply. Sterling Vance has very expensive lawyers, Chin continued. He's already paid the BLM $20,000 for that horse. He's not going to just walk away. I know. And even if we win, even if we can prove ownership and get the sale voided, you're looking at an animal that's completely wild. He's never been handled, never been broken. The BLM marked him as dangerous. You're 72 years old, Mr. Wang. What exactly do you plan to do with a wild stallion if you get him? Silas met her eyes. Set him free, he said. Properly this time. On my land. Or what's left of it. Chen blinked. You want to go through all this legal trouble just to release him? No, Silas said. I want to give him a choice. That's something nobody's offered him yet. Vance wants to own him, break him, turn him into a spectacle. The BLM wanted to kill him. I want to offer him freedom on terms he can accept. That's possibly the most expensive and legally complicated act of conscience I've ever heard, Chen said. But she was smiling slightly. It's also exactly the kind of crazy that might work in front of Judge Morrison. He's old-school ranch, hates developers, and has a soft spot for lost causes. Can you do it? Alden asked. Can you at least get us a hearing before the sale goes through? Chen pulled out her phone, checked the calendar. Sale is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. I can file an emergency injunction this afternoon, but I'll need everything you've got. The DNA analysis, your veterinary records, any proof of the original brand registration, witnesses to the condition of the horse 25 years ago. I've got most of it, Alden said, pulling a thick folder from his bag. Bella's medical records, going back to when Silas first bought her. The brand registration, I pulled a copy from county records last night. My own notes from the emergency C-section and the colt's first 3 weeks. Witnesses? Chen asked. Martha Goodwin, Alden said. She was the one who found Silas half-frozen after his week-long search. She nursed him back to health, saw Bella's body before we buried her. She can testify to the mare's condition, the timeline. Anyone else? Silence. Then Silas spoke. Tom Brightwater. He was part of the search party. Cheyenne Tracker, best man I ever knew in the mountains. If he's still alive, he'll remember. He's alive, Chen said. Live's up on the reservation. I'll contact him. She started making notes. This is going to be tight, gentlemen. Even if I get the injunction, even if we get a hearing, we're asking a judge to void a completed sale based on events from 25 years ago and scientific evidence that the average person doesn't understand. What about the brand? Silas asked. Alden said Storm might still have traces of the tag, scarring where it wore against his skin. That would help, Chen admitted. But we'd need to examine the horse, and Vance's lawyers will fight any attempt to delay the sale for additional examination. Then we go tonight, Silas said. Both Alden and Chen looked at him sharply. What? Chen asked. The horse is still in the BLM holding facility, right? They keep it guarded? Loosely, Alden said. One-night watchman, mostly to prevent theft. The horses are scheduled for sale, not prison. So we go tonight, Silas repeated. We examine Storm ourselves. If we can find physical evidence of the brand, photograph it, document it. That's proof no lawyer can argue with. That's also trespassing, Chen pointed out. Possibly breaking and entering. Definitely evidence tampering if we're caught. It's my horse, Silas said quietly. I'm just going to look at my own property. Chen studied him for a long moment. Then she sighed and pulled out a legal pad. If, and this is a massive if, you were to conduct an independent examination of the animal in question, you would need proper photographic documentation. Time-stamped, multiple angles, clear enough to show detail. You'd need measurements, written description of any identifying marks. And you'd need a witness who isn't party to the ownership claim. You volunteering? Alden asked. Absolutely not, Chen said firmly. But I might know someone who does wildlife photography for the State Parks Department. Someone who could coincidentally be in the area testing new camera equipment. Someone who, if they happen to observe an elderly rancher examining a horse through legally questionable means, might feel obligated to document it for their own records. Silas felt the first real smile cross his face in longer than he could remember. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Chen said. We're still playing a long shot. But I'll file the injunction this afternoon. That should at least delay the sale until we can get before Judge Morrison. What happens after that? She shrugged. We'll see if Wyoming law still has room for men who care more about their horses than their bank accounts. The night was cold, the kind of high desert cold that reached through clothing and found the bones beneath. Silas sat in Alden's truck, parked a quarter-mile from the BLM facility, watching his breath fog the windshield. It was past midnight, the moon a thin crescent offering little light. "Last chance to back out," Alden said quietly. Silas shook his head. "I've backed out of enough things in my life. Not this." The photographer, a young woman named Sarah who wore night vision goggles and carried camera equipment worth more than Silas's truck, sat in the back seat, checking her gear with professional efficiency. "The watchman makes rounds every hour," she said. "Just passed by 20 minutes ago. That gives us 40 minutes, maybe less. I'll go in first, find a position with clear sight lines. You two wait for my signal." She slipped out of the truck and disappeared into the darkness like smoke. Silas watched her go, then turned to Alden. "If this goes wrong." "It won't," Alden said. "And even if it does, it's about time I faced the consequences of my choices. I've been hiding from them long enough." They waited. The cold seeped through the truck's old heater, making Silas's joints ache. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. 25 years. 25 years of grief and guilt and slow suicide. And now, maybe, a chance at redemption. Not forgiveness. He wasn't sure he deserved that, but at least purpose. Sarah's flashlight blinked twice from near the fence line. "The signal." "Let's go," Alden said. They moved through the darkness, Silas's boots crunching on frost-brittle grass. The facility was just a series of pipe rail corrals and a small office building. No fancy security, no cameras. The BLM operated on a shoestring budget out here. The horses were visible in the pens, dark shapes shifting nervously as the men approached. Storm stood alone in the isolation pen, separated from the others. Even in the darkness, his presence was palpable, a concentration of wild energy, a refusal to submit. Silas could hear him breathing, could smell the sharp scent of an animal that had never known a stall or a blanket or a human hand except in violence. Sarah was positioned near the fence, her camera already trained on the pen. She wore night vision equipment, but she'd also rigged a low-light LED that would provide just enough illumination for documentation without alerting the watchman. Silas approached the fence slowly. The horse's head came up immediately, ears pinned back, a low warning rumble in his chest. "Easy," Silas whispered. "Easy, boy. I'm not here to hurt you." Storm snorted, backed up against the far rail. His eyes caught what little light there was, reflecting it back in 2 points of fire. "We need to get close enough to check for scarring," Alden whispered. "Left shoulder area, where the tag would have rubbed." "He won't let us near him," Silas said. "Then we wait," Alden replied. "We be patient. We let him get curious." So they stood there, 2 old men in the freezing darkness, not moving, not speaking, just breathing, just being present. Minutes stretched. The horse watched them with unblinking intensity. And then, so quietly Silas almost didn't notice it, Storm took a step forward. Just one. His nostrils flared, testing the air. Another step. His ears, which had been pinned flat, rotated forward slightly. Silas remembered something from 30 years ago, from when he'd trained horses for a living. The most important thing wasn't dominance or force, it was patience. It was showing the horse that you were worth trusting. Slowly, moving like he was underwater, Silas pulled something from his pocket. An apple. He'd brought it without really knowing why, some instinct from the days when he'd understood horses better than he understood people. He held it out, not reaching through the fence, just showing it. Storm's nostrils flared wider. He'd been in captivity for a week now, fed nothing but hay pellets. The smell of fresh fruit was something from his wild life, from autumn raids on abandoned orchards in the foothills. Another step, and another. The horse was close enough now that Silas could see the scars on his coat. White lines from a life of freedom, badges of survival. Close enough to see the intelligence in those eyes, the wariness, but also something else. Curiosity. Recognition of something familiar in this strange, broken man who smelled of hay and time and sorrow. "Bella," Silas whispered. "I don't know if you can understand this, but your grandmother was named Bella. She was the finest horse I ever knew. And I failed her. I failed her because I was broken and drunk and lost. But I swear to you, on whatever I have left to swear on, I won't fail you." The horse took the final step. His muzzle extended, lips pulling back to reveal strong teeth. For a moment, Silas thought he'd miscalculated, that the horse would bite. Instead, Storm took the apple with surprising gentleness, crunching it with evident satisfaction. And in that moment, with the horse distracted, Alden moved. Quick despite his age, he focused a small penlight on Storm's left shoulder. The horse startled, but didn't flee. And there, visible in the beam of light, was a thin white line of scar tissue, running in a perfect circle about 3 inches in diameter. The exact size and placement where a colt's identity tag would have worn against growing skin for months before finally wearing free. Got it, Sarah whispered, her camera clicking softly. Multiple angles, clear definition. That's evidence. Storm finished the apple and looked at Silas with something that might have been disappointment that there wasn't more. Then his head came up sharply. His ears swiveled. A moment later, Silas heard it too. Footsteps, approaching from the office building. The watchman, making his rounds early. Time to go, Alden hissed. They moved quickly but quietly, shadows returning to shadows. Behind them, Storm watched them go, his dark eyes unreadable, the white scar on his shoulder glowing faintly in the moonlight like a brand made of starlight rather than iron. By the time the watchman reached the holding pens, the only evidence of their presence was a fresh apple core lying in the dirt, which he kicked aside without noticing. Judge Marcus Morrison's courtroom occupied the top floor of the Sublette County Courthouse, a sandstone building that had witnessed 100 years of Wyoming justice. Mineral disputes, water rights battles, the occasional murder trial. Morrison himself was 76, a former ranch hand who'd put himself through law school via rodeo winnings and sheer stubbornness. He had a reputation for fairness, a fondness for precedent, and an absolute intolerance for bullshit. Silas sat at the plaintiff's table beside Harriet Chun, wearing a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, but was clean and pressed. Across the aisle, Sterling Vance was flanked by 2 lawyers from Jackson Hole whose combined hourly rate probably exceeded Silas's yearly income. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread through Broken Arrow about the showdown, and small towns loved their theater. Morrison banged his gavel once. This is an emergency hearing on the matter of Wayne versus Bureau of Land Management and Vance. Ms. Chun, you filed the injunction. Make your case. Chun stood, and Silas was struck by how she transformed in that moment, from a small-town lawyer to something harder, sharper, forged in bigger arenas. Your Honor, this case centers on a question of ownership and identity. My client, Silas Wayne, claims ownership of a horse currently in BLM custody, scheduled for sale to Mr. Sterling Vance. This claim is based on documented bloodline evidence showing that the animal in question is the direct descendant of registered livestock that escaped Mr. Wayne's property 25 years ago. Your Honor, one of Vance's lawyers, a sleek woman named Patricia Kerrigan, interrupted. This is absurd. The horse in question was captured on federal land, has no brands or identifying marks consistent with domestic livestock, and has lived wild for its entire life. Ms. Chun is trying to avoid a legitimate purchase based on unverifiable claims about events from a quarter-century ago. I'll hear the evidence, Morrison said. Ms. Chun approached the bench with a folder. I'm submitting DNA analysis conducted by Dr. William Alden, a licensed veterinarian with 40 years of experience. This analysis shows conclusive genetic markers linking the stallion in question, known as Storm, to a registered mare named Bella, owned by Mr. Wayne until December 1999. The probability of this relationship is 99.97%. DNA from a horse, Kerrigan scoffed. Your Honor, even if this analysis is accurate, which we dispute, it proves nothing about ownership. Wild horses frequently carry genetic material from domestic stock. It's meaningless. Dr. Alden, Morrison said, looking at the old veterinarian in the gallery. Come forward. Alden approached the bench with the steady walk of a man who'd spent his life in the mountains and courtrooms were just another kind of wilderness. He was sworn in, and Chun began her questioning. Dr. Alden, can you explain your relationship with the defendant? Silas and I have been friends for 40 years, Alden said. I was his veterinarian when he ran the Double W Ranch, treated all his horses including Bella. And can you tell the court what happened in December 1999? Alden took a breath and told the story. The blizzard, the drunken mistake, the search, the discovery of Bella dying in the snow. And then, in a quiet voice that nonetheless carried through the courtroom, he admitted his crime. The emergency C-section, the secret raising of the colt, the release into the wild herd. Why didn't you tell Mr. Wayne? Chen asked. Because I was afraid, Alden said simply. He was broken, destroyed by guilt. I thought, wrongly, perhaps, that giving him a fragile, premature foal would destroy him further if the colt died. So I made a choice to let the wild raise what I couldn't trust civilization to protect. Your Honor, Kerrigan objected. This is a touching story, but it's also an admission of illegal activity. Dr. Alden is confessing to releasing private livestock onto federal land without authorization. Even if his story is true, it doesn't establish ownership. It establishes abandonment. The colt was tagged, Chen countered, with Mr. Wayne's registered brand. Physical evidence. Which is where exactly? Kerrigan asked. Where is this magical tag that supposedly proves everything? Chen pulled out the photographs from the night visit. Sarah, the photographer, had done excellent work. The images were crystal clear, showing Storm's shoulder from multiple angles, the circular scar tissue clearly visible. This scarring is consistent with a metal identification tag worn for an extended period during the animal's first year of life, Chen explained. We have the original tag, removed by Dr. Alden before release, and kept as evidence. She held up the small, tarnished piece of metal with Silas's brand engraved on it. Kerrigan looked at the photos, looked at the tag, and her expression hardened. Your Honor, these photographs were taken illegally. The facility was closed, and there's no record of authorized access. This is fruit of the poisonous tree. Inadmissible. Morrison leaned forward. Ms. Chun, how were these photographs obtained? A wildlife photographer, working on an independent project, happened to be testing equipment near the facility, Chen said smoothly. She documented what she observed, an elderly man examining what he believed to be his property. The fact that it was after hours is irrelevant. There's no evidence of breaking and entering, no evidence of tampering with the animal or the facility. Convenient, Kerrigan muttered. Your Honor, Chen pressed on, we're not asking you to void the sale based solely on DNA and photographs. We're asking you to delay the sale long enough for proper verification. Allow us to have Storm officially examined by an independent veterinarian. Allow us to present our full case. Mr. Vance has already paid for the horse. What harm does a brief delay cause him, compared to the potential harm of selling away a man's rightful property? Morrison looked at Vance, who sat at his table with an expression of controlled irritation. Mr. Vance, what's your position? Vance stood, smoothing his expensive suit. Your Honor, with all respect, this is a waste of the court's time. I've invested significant resources into acquiring this animal for a legitimate business purpose. Mr. Wayne's claim is based on events from before many people in this room were born. Even if his mare did contribute genetic material to wild herds 25 years ago, that doesn't give him ownership of every horse that might carry those genes. If we accept that logic, we'd have to trace every wild Mustang back to somebody's escaped livestock. It's absurd. It's not about genetics alone, Silas said quietly. Everyone turned. He hadn't been sworn in yet, hadn't been called to testify. Chen put a warning hand on his arm, but he gently removed it and stood. Your Honor, I know what I look like, Silas continued. I'm old. I'm broke. I've been a drunk for 25 years. I got no business making claims on anything. But that horse out there, Storm, he's the last piece of something I destroyed through my own stupidity and weakness. His grandmother died because I was too drunk to check a latch. His father, if it was a father, we don't know the gender of the colt, grew up wild because Doc Alden was trying to protect me from my own grief. He paused, gathering words that had been locked away for a quarter century. I'm not asking to own Storm, he said. I don't want to break him, train him, sell him. I just want the chance to give him what I couldn't give Bella, a choice. Freedom on land that used to be mine, where he can run or stay as he sees fit. Mr. Vance wants to cage him, shock him, turn him into an attraction. The BLM wanted to kill him. I just want to offer him something different. And I think if you let me try, if you give me the chance to approach him as something other than prey or property, he'll recognize me. Not because of magic or sentiment, but because blood knows blood. Because some things run deeper than time. The courtroom was silent. Morrison looked at Silas for a long moment, then at Vance, then at the photographs of the scar on Storm's shoulder. Here's what we're going to do, the judge said. The sale is delayed for 72 hours. In that time, Storm will be examined by an independent veterinarian chosen by the court. We'll verify the scarring, compare it to the dimensions of the tag, and determine if there's sufficient physical evidence to support Mr. Wayne's claim. Additionally, and this is unusual, but I'm inclined to allow it, Mr. Wayne will be given supervised access to the horse. 30 minutes, in the presence of BLM officials and Mr. Vance's representatives. If the horse shows recognition, if there's any behavioral evidence of a pre-existing relationship, that will be considered as well. Your Honor, Kerrigan objected. You can't seriously be suggesting that animal behavior constitutes legal evidence of ownership. I'm suggesting, Morrison said sharply, that in a case involving livestock, the animal's response to claimed owners is absolutely relevant. Wyoming law has precedent going back 100 years recognizing that domestic animals can identify their owners. If Mr. Wayne's claim is legitimate, we should see some evidence of it in the horse's behavior. If it's not, we'll know that too. He banged his gavel. 72 hours. Examination scheduled for tomorrow morning at the BLM facility. Mr. Wayne's interaction with the horse to follow immediately after. This hearing is adjourned. As the courtroom emptied, Vance approached Silas with Kerrigan at his side. You're making a mistake, old man, Vance said quietly. That horse is wild. He's going to kick your head in, and then I'm going to buy him anyway. You're just delaying the inevitable and embarrassing yourself in the process. Silas met his eyes. Maybe so, but at least I'll have tried. That's more than I did 25 years ago. Vance shook his head and walked away. Chin appeared at Silas's elbow. That was either very brave or very stupid, she said. You essentially bet everything on the horse recognizing you after 25 years and zero previous contact. You know that's impossible, right? Probably, Silas admitted. But I've been living with impossible for a long time. Might as well lean into it. The morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of Wyoming morning where the sky looked like it had been scoured clean with steel wool, and the mountains stood out so sharp they could cut your eyes. Silas hadn't slept. He'd spent the night at Martha's place, in the small room above the roadhouse that she kept for emergencies and lost causes. She'd brought him coffee at 4 a.m., sat with him in silence until sunrise, and then driven him to the BLM facility herself. The crowd that gathered was small but intent. Judge Morrison, who wanted to see this play out firsthand, Chun and Kerrigan, Vance and his entourage, a handful of locals who'd known Silas in the old days, and Dr. Patricia Alvarez, the independent veterinarian the court had appointed. She was younger than Alden, early 50s, with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd learned her craft in harsh conditions. Storm stood in the isolation pen, having been moved there at dawn. He looked, if possible, even more wild than he had a few days ago. The confinement was wearing on him. His coat was dull from stress, his eyes wilder. When the group approached, he exploded into movement, running the perimeter of the pen with furious energy, looking for escape routes that didn't exist. That's a dangerous animal, one of the BLM officials said. Mr. Wayne, are you sure you want to do this? We can't guarantee your safety. I don't recall asking for guarantees, Silas said. Dr. Alvarez examined the horse from outside the fence first, using binoculars and a spotting scope. She took her time, methodical and thorough, while everyone waited. Finally, she lowered her equipment and approached the judge. There is definitely scarring on the left shoulder, she confirmed. Circular pattern, approximately 3 inches in diameter, consistent with prolonged friction from a metal tag during the animal's first year of life. The scarring is old, fully healed, but distinctive. I need to sedate the horse to make detailed measurements, but from what I can see, it matches the dimensions of the tag in evidence. Sedation is out of the question, Vance's lawyer said immediately. It could affect the animal's behavior during Mr. Wayne's interaction. That would invalidate the entire test. Agreed, Morrison said. Dr. Alvarez, is there enough evidence from your external examination to support the claim that this horse wore Mr. Wayne's identification tag? It's consistent with that claim, she said carefully. I can't say definitively without closer examination, but yes, it's consistent. Morrison nodded. Mr. Wayne, you're up. Remember, you have 30 minutes. The moment the horse shows signs of serious aggression, the test ends. Understood, Silas said. He walked to the gate of the pen alone. Behind him, he could hear whispered conversations, could feel the weight of skeptical eyes. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the horse. Storm had stopped running when Silas approached. Now he stood at the far end of the pen, sides heaving, his dark coat slick with nervous sweat despite the cold. His eyes, those eyes that had haunted Silas since he'd first seen them, fixed on the old man with an intensity that was almost human in its focus. Silas opened the gate and stepped inside. The response was immediate. Storm reared, screaming a challenge that echoed off the mountains. His front hooves came down like hammers, close enough that Silas felt the vibration through his boots. The crowd gasped. Someone, probably Martha, shouted his name. But Silas didn't move. He stood there, hands at his sides, making himself small and still. He breathed. He waited. The horse circled him at a distance, snorting, shaking his head. Every muscle in his body was taut, ready to strike or flee. This close, Silas could see every scar, could smell the wild scent of him, sage and snow and freedom. "I know you're angry," Silas said quietly. "I know you're scared. They caught you, caged you, hurt you. And now here comes another human, another person who wants something from you. I don't blame you for wanting to kick my head in. Hell, I've wanted to kick my own head in for 25 years. The horse's ears flicked forward at the sound of his voice, though he didn't stop circling. "Your grandmother was named Bella," Silas continued, not moving, just talking. "She was the color of midnight, like you. Had the same proud way of holding her head, the same intelligence in her eyes. She could cut a cow out of a herd before the cow knew it was being cut, could stop on a dime and give you change. But more than that, she had heart, courage. I saw her face down a mountain lion once, protecting her herd. Didn't back down, didn't run, just stood there, hooves ready, daring that cat to try something." Storm had slowed his circling. He was still wary, still ready to bolt or attack, but something in Silas's voice seemed to puzzle him. "The night I lost her," Silas said, and his voice cracked. "The night of the storm, I was drunk. Not falling down drunk, but drunk enough to be careless. Drunk enough to think I'd checked all the latches when I hadn't. And she got out. Went into the mountains looking for shelter, maybe, or just running because that's what horses do when they're scared. And I went after her, but I was too late. Too slow. Too broken." He pulled something from his pocket, the old metal tag, the one that had hung around a colt's neck for months before scarring the skin beneath. He held it up, let it catch the light. "Doc Alden gave me this 3 days ago," Silas said. "Told me a story I never knew. About how Bella died, but her baby lived. About how there was a choice between telling me, broken, drunk, useless me, or giving that colt a chance at freedom. And he chose freedom. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe I had a right to know. But maybe it was the only choice that made sense." Storm had stopped circling. He stood 15 feet away, his head raised, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. His ears were fully forward now, focused on Silas with laser intensity. "I can't prove you're Bella's grandson," Silas said. "Can't prove that this tag hung around your father's neck, or your mother's, or whoever's. Can't prove anything except that when I look at you, I see her. See the same fire, the same refusal to be broken. And I think, I hope, that maybe that counts for something." He slowly, very slowly, knelt down. It hurt. His knees were shot, his back protesting, but he managed it. He placed the tag on the ground between them, and then sat back on his heels, hands open, palms up. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said. "I'm not asking you to be tamed or owned or turned into something you're not. I'm just asking, begging, really, for you to give me a chance to make right what I made wrong. To offer you what I should have offered Bella. A place to run. A place to be free. On your terms, not mine." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Storm stood motionless, a statue carved from midnight and starlight. Then, so slowly that at first Silas thought he was imagining it, the horse took a step forward. Then another. His neck extended, nostrils fluttering. He was scenting Silas, analyzing him the way only horses can, reading fear and truth through smell and pheromones, and whatever mysterious senses animals possess that humans have long forgotten. Another step. Storm was close enough now that Silas could have touched him, but he didn't. He remained still, barely breathing, offering nothing but presence. The horse lowered his head. His muzzle, soft and whiskered, came within inches of Silas's face. Their breath mingled in the cold air. Man and beast, separated by 25 years and 1,000 miles of wilderness, connected by something that had no name but felt as real as bone. And then Storm did something no one expected. He reached down and took the metal tag gently in his teeth. Lifted it, held it for a moment, as if weighing its significance. Then he dropped it in Silas's lap and took a step back. The crowd erupted. Some people cheered, others gasped. Judge Morrison leaned forward in his seat, his expression unreadable. Storm turned away, moved to the far side of the pen, and began to graze on the sparse hay as if nothing had happened. But his ears remained cocked back, listening, watching. Silas picked up the tag with trembling hands. There were new tooth marks on it, fresh dents from the stallion's powerful jaw. He closed his fingers around it and felt something break open in his chest. 25 years of grief and guilt and self-loathing cracking like ice under spring sun. 30 minutes are up, one of the BLM officials called. Silas stood, slowly, painfully, and walked to the gate. He didn't look back. When he exited the pen, Martha was there to steady him. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Judge Morrison approached, his weathered face thoughtful. That was remarkable, he said. I've never seen a wild horse respond to a human like that. Not without training, not without history. So what does it mean? Vance demanded. Legally, what does it prove? Morrison looked at him, then at Storm, then back at Silas. It proves enough, he said. The physical evidence, the scarring, the tag, the DNA, establishes a credible claim of ownership based on documented bloodline. The horse's behavior, while not definitive on its own, corroborates that claim. Combined with Dr. Alden's testimony about the original release. He paused. Mr. Vance, I'm voiding the sale. The horse is Mr. Wayne's property. You can't, Vance started. I can and I am, Morrison said firmly. You'll be refunded your purchase price. The BLM will release the horse to Mr. Wayne's custody immediately. This matter is closed. Vance's face went purple with rage. This is ridiculous. You're basing a legal decision on some old drunk's fairy tale about a horse that's been wild for 25 years. I'll appeal. I'll take this to federal court if I have to. That's your right, Morrison said. But until then, the horse belongs to Mr. Wayne. He turned to Silas. What are your plans for him? Silas looked at Storm, who was watching this drama with the detached interest of someone who understands that human complications rarely affect the important things. I'm taking him home, Silas said, to what's left of the Double W. And then I'm going to open the gate and let him decide whether he wants to stay or go. That's legally risky, Chin warned. If he leaves, if he goes back to being wild, someone could argue you've abandoned your claim. I know, Silas said, but I'm done caging things, even if it's for their own good. The Double W Ranch sat at the base of the Gros Ventre Range, 20 miles from Broken Arrow on a dirt road that turned to soup in spring and ice in winter. It had been one of the premier horse breeding operations in Wyoming once, back when Silas Wayne was young and sober and ambitious. Now it was mostly ghosts and memories. The main house boarded up, the barn leaning, the corrals overgrown with sagebrush. Silas hadn't been back in 15 years. After losing Bella, after the bankruptcy, he'd simply walked away, left the land to the bank and the weeds. But the bank had never sold it. The market for remote ranches was thin, and the property had problems, water rights issues, access road disputes, soil too rocky for much besides scrub grass. So it sat, year after year, slowly returning to the wilderness from which it had been carved. Martha drove the old stock trailer, her truck straining on the rough road. Silas rode in the cab beside her, silent, watching the familiar landscape emerge from memory into reality. Behind them, in the trailer, Storm shifted and stamped, the sound of his hooves on metal a rhythmic commentary on captivity. They'd loaded him that morning, with surprising ease. Alden had been there, and the BLM officials, and enough witnesses to satisfy legal requirements. Storm had balked at first, seen the trailer and understood it for the cage it was. But when Silas had walked up the ramp ahead of him, the horse had followed. Not calmly. He'd sweated and snorted and rolled his eyes, but he'd followed. Never seen anything like that, the BLM supervisor had muttered. It's like he understands. Maybe he does, Alden had replied. Now, as the truck crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Silas felt his chest tighten. The last time he'd seen this place, it had been dying. Now it was dead, or close enough. The barn's roof had partially collapsed. The house windows were broken, courtesy of either vandals or winter storms. The fences were down in a dozen places. Jesus, Martha breathed. Silas, this place. I know, he said quietly. It's a ruin. Just like me. No, she said firmly. It's a place waiting for someone to care about it again. There's a difference. She pulled the truck to a stop in what had once been the main yard. The trailer rocked as Storm moved inside, anxious to be free of confinement. Silas climbed out slowly, his joints protesting, and stood looking at the wreckage of his former life. The corrals were the least damaged, pipe rail construction, built to last. With work, maybe a week's hard work, they could be functional again. The barn, that would take more. But the land itself, the thousands of acres stretching up into the foothills, that was unchanged. It was still wild, still free, still Wyoming. Where do you want him? Martha asked. Silas pointed to the largest corral, the one that backed up against open rangeland. There. And we're going to leave the back gate open. You sure about that? No, Silas admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. They unloaded Storm together, Silas leading him down the ramp with just a halter and a prayer. The horse emerged into sunlight, into the wind carrying scents of sage and pine and freedom, and he stopped. His head came up, ears swiveling, taking in this new place that was somehow familiar. Mountain air, open space, the distant sound of a creek running over stones. Silas led him to the corral and removed the halter. Storm stood there for a moment, then exploded into motion, running the perimeter, testing it, his hooves throwing up dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. He bucked and kicked, expressing joy or rage, or just the pure relief of movement after days of confinement. And then he noticed the open back gate. He stopped mid-stride, staring at it. The gate led to what had once been pasture land, which led to open range, which led to the mountains. It was a doorway to everything he'd known before capture, before pain, before these strange humans who claimed to understand him. He's going to bolt, Martha said quietly. Maybe, Silas said. But Storm didn't bolt. He approached the gate carefully, sniffing it, examining it the way he'd examined everything since being captured, with intelligence and suspicion. He walked through it, stood on the other side, looked back at Silas. Their eyes met across 50 feet of space and 25 years of history. Man and horse, broken and wild. Both survivors, both marked by loss. Then Storm turned and ran, not in panic, but in joy, great, bounding strides that carried him up the slope, toward the foothills, toward the high country, toward freedom. Martha put a hand on Silas's shoulder. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be, Silas replied, watching the black stallion grow smaller in the distance. He made his choice. That's all I wanted to give him. They stood there for a long time, until Storm was just a dot against the mountainside, and then nothing at all. 3 days passed. Silas spent them working on the ranch, doing what he could with limited resources and a body that protested every nail hammered, every board lifted. He wasn't trying to restore it. That would take more money and energy than he possessed. He was just trying to make it functional, livable, a place where something could survive if it chose to. Doc Alden came out on the second day, bringing supplies and questions. Any sign of him? No, Silas said. He's gone. Back to his herd, probably. And you're okay with that? Silas hammered another nail into a fence post before answering. I gave him a choice, document. That was the whole point. I can't be upset when he makes it. You're lying, Alden said, but not unkindly. You're heartbroken. You got him back just to lose him again. Maybe, Silas admitted. But at least this time, I lost him the right way. On his terms, not mine. Alden helped him work, the two old men laboring in companionable silence. When the sun started setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Alden packed up his tools. You planning to stay out here? He asked. Or are you coming back to town? I think I'll stay, Silas said. At least for a while. See if I can't make something of this place again. Alone? Yeah, alone. Alden nodded, understanding. Some things needed to be done in solitude, in silence, in the company of ghosts and memories. That night, Silas slept in the old house for the first time in 15 years. It smelled of dust and time, and the roof leaked in 2 places, but it was home. Or had been. Or could be again. He was awakened at dawn by a sound he couldn't place at first, rhythmic, powerful, familiar. He sat up, confused, and went to the broken window. In the corral, drinking from the water trough he'd repaired yesterday, was Storm. The stallion looked up as Silas appeared in the window. They regarded each other in the gray light of dawn. Then Storm went back to drinking, unconcerned, as if he'd never left. Silas dressed quickly and went outside, hardly daring to believe it. But Storm was real, solid, his black coat dusty from mountain travel, his mane tangled with burrs. He'd been running, been free, and then he'd come back. Why? Silas asked quietly. The horse didn't answer, of course. He finished drinking, moved to the hay Silas had left in the corner, and began to eat with the calm efficiency of an animal that had made its decision and saw no reason to explain it. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Storm would spend the days roaming, sometimes nearby, sometimes disappearing into the high country for hours. But every evening, as the sun set, he'd return to the corral. He'd drink, eat if food was available, and then he'd stand near the fence, watching the house, watching Silas work. He never let Silas touch him beyond that first meeting in the BLM pen. If Silas approached too close, Storm would move away, maintaining distance, maintaining his wildness. But he stayed. He chose, every day, to stay. Word got around. People came to see the wild stallion who'd come home. Some brought gifts, feed, hay, tools for the ranch repairs. Others just brought curiosity and stories. The local newspaper ran a piece. Wild horse chooses freedom and home. Martha came every few days with food and news. Sterling Vance left town. She reported one afternoon. Took his money and his resort plans somewhere else. Heard he was cursing your name all the way to Jackson Hole. Good riddance, Silas said. Judge Morrison wants to know if you need help with the property, she continued. Says there are some legal complications about the bank's claim, but he thinks he can sort them out. Get you clear title if you want it. I want it, Silas said, and realized it was true. He wanted this broken place, wanted the work of fixing it, wanted the challenge of building something from ruins. One morning, 6 weeks after Storm's return, Silas was repairing the barn roof when he heard a familiar sound. Hoofbeats, plural, coming down from the high country. He climbed down from his ladder and watched as Storm emerged from the tree line, followed by 2 Mares and a yearling colt. The Mares were wild mustangs, shaggy and wary, their eyes rolling nervously at the sight of human habitation. But they followed Storm, trusting his judgment, and when he led them to the water trough, they drank. Silas stood very still, barely breathing. Storm had brought his herd, his family. He'd chosen not just to return himself, but to bridge the gap between wild and domestic, to create something new, a space where freedom and home could coexist. Over the following months, more horses appeared. Never tame, never broken, but comfortable enough with Silas's presence to use the water, to shelter in the corrals during harsh weather, to graze the pastures that Silas carefully maintained. The Double W became something it had never been before, not a training facility or a breeding operation, but a sanctuary. A place where wild horses could choose to be near humans without surrendering their essential nature. Alden visited regularly, documenting everything, taking samples for his genetic database. This is remarkable, he said one day, watching Storm's herd graze peacefully while Silas worked on fence repairs nearby. You've created something unique. A hybrid space between wilderness and civilization. I didn't create anything, Silas said. Storm did. I just gave him the option. That's not nothing, Alden replied. Options are everything. Winter came, as it always did in Wyoming, with fury and beauty in equal measure. The first major blizzard hit in late November, dumping 3 feet of snow and dropping temperatures to 20 below. Silas, remembering another blizzard from a lifetime ago, made sure the barn was secure, made sure there was hay stacked and water accessible. Storm and his herd weathered it in the barn, accepting shelter without accepting captivity. When the storm cleared and the sun emerged in a sky so blue it hurt to look at, Silas watched them file out into the snow, breaking trail toward the high country, choosing freedom even when comfort was available. It was December 14th, 25 years to the day since Bella had died in the snow, when Silas made a decision. He saddled his old mare, one of the few domestic horses he'd kept from the old days, and rode up into the mountains. He knew where he was going, had known since the night Doc Alden told him the truth. He found the place where Alden had discovered Bella, a shallow cave, protected from the worst of the wind, marked now only by his memory and the old man's description. Snow covered everything, making it look peaceful, pristine, as if nothing had ever died here. Silas dismounted and stood in the silence. He thought about Bella, about her strength and courage. He thought about the colt that had lived, the bloodline that had survived. He thought about Storm, about the impossible choice the stallion had made to return, to trust, to bridge worlds. "I'm sorry," he said to the wind, to the mountains, to the memory of a mare who deserved better. "I'm sorry I was too broken to save you. But your legacy survived. Your bloodline is free. And I promise, I swear, I'll keep it that way." He pulled out the old metal tag, the one that had started everything, and buried it in the snow at the cave's entrance. A marker, a memorial, a promise kept too late, but kept nonetheless. When he rode back down the mountain as sunset painted the snow pink and gold, he saw them, Storm's herd, silhouetted against the dying light, running free across the ridgeline. The stallion was in the lead, his black coat stark against the white snow, his mane flying like a banner. For a moment, Storm stopped and looked back, down the mountain to where Silas sat on his horse. The distance was too great for eye contact, too great for any real communication. But Silas raised his hand in acknowledgement, in gratitude, in farewell. Then Storm turned and ran, and his herd ran with him, toward the high country, toward freedom, toward whatever future they would write for themselves. Silas rode home to the Double W Ranch, to the work that would never really be finished, to the life he was building from the ruins of the old one. He was 72 years old. He'd been drunk for 25 years. He'd lost everything and found it again in a form he'd never expected. He was not redeemed. Redemption was too simple a word for what had happened, too neat an ending for a story that was still being written. But he was awake. After 25 years of sleepwalking through grief, he was finally, fully awake. And that was enough.